In Isaiah chapter 41, God is speaking, and God says this: "But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend." God here speaks of Abraham, the great patriarch of Israel, as my friend. We don't often think about God having friends, but here God clearly calls Abraham his friend. In the letter of James in the New Testament, towards the end of the second chapter, James says something very similar. He says, "Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called friend of God." James here is writing at least 2,000 years after Abraham's life. And when he reflects back on Abraham's life, he's like, oh yeah, friend of God. Towards the end of the book of Exodus, we're not talking about Abraham here, we're talking about Moses. And Moses oftentimes went into the tent of meeting and spoke to God. And here at the end of chapter 33, we find, "Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend." And then, of course, in today's lesson from the Gospel of John, Jesus is speaking to his disciples. It's the night before his crucifixion. It's the night before his death. It's the night he had gotten up from the Last Supper with his disciples. He's washed their feet. He's issued the new commandment. And then he says to them, "I have called you friends." There's this string of thought through the Old and New Testament where God calls us friends. There are many metaphors of our relationship with God throughout the scriptures. Sometimes God is shepherd and we're the sheep. Sometimes God is master and we're the servants. Sometimes God is king and we're the subjects. Sometimes God is father and we're God's daughters and sons. But sometimes God is our friend and we are God's friends. There's a reason why there are so many different metaphors about our relationship with God, because no one of those metaphors can fully capture the depth, height, length, and breadth of what a relationship with God is like. Yes, it's like shepherd, but yes, it's also like king, and yes, it's also like master, but it's also like father, parent. Each of them rounds out the other and adds more to it, as does our relationship with God as friend. Friend, as I look at the other metaphors for a relationship with God, friend is the only one that conveys a sense of mutuality. It's also the only one that involves any sense of a choice. A sheep has no choice over who its shepherd is. A subject has no choice over who its king is. A child has no choice over who its parent is, although sometimes children would like to have that. But a friend doesn't just happen. A friend isn't assigned. A hand of friendship may be extended to us, and then we have a choice as to whether we are going to extend the hand of friendship to. This is why I think this metaphor, this understanding of our relationship with God as friend, is the one that is probably most aspirational. Because you aren't just automatically a friend. You have to choose it. And so in this metaphor, God is saying, I choose you as a friend. And then we are then left the opportunity, the choice, to be a friend with God too. So what is a friend? So a friend is someone that we talk to, that we hang out with, that we share things with, right? I mean, that's just a normal friend. This is one of those aspects of our relationship with God that I think the metaphor of friendship can really break open. When I talk to people about prayer in a group setting, one of the things I frequently hear back from people is, well, yes, yes, prayer, I've tried it, but it's just awkward. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to speak. I don't know, like the words coming out of my mouth feel strange and weird. But you would never say that about a real friend. If a real true friend called you up and said, hey, guess what? We're both vaccinated. Let's go to dinner. You wouldn't say, oh gosh, I just don't know what to say. Dearest friend, how art thou? Shall we sup on the morrow? Like you don't talk strange. You don't talk in Elizabethan English. You just talk. And so if God is our friend, then we don't have to use like contrived language. We don't have to try and make things sound good or highfalutin. We can just speak and know that our friend is listening, and then listen for our friend to speak as well. A friend is also someone who depends on another. Friends depend on each other. And if you're someone who's likely to watch a sermon online, there's probably some sense inside of you that's like, yes, I depend on God. And as we grow in our understanding and our relationship with God, we try and depend on God more and more. But the part about this that I think is foreign and strange is that in friendship, there's a mutual dependence. And so if God is calling us friend, it means that not only are we to rely on God, but that God, in some sense, is depending on us. God is depending on you to be there. And we see this with Jesus and his disciples, and particularly after Jesus' death and resurrection. God, Jesus, depends on these people to go out and spread news of the kingdom, to spread good news around the world. God depends on you. Now, sometimes friends aren't always dependable, right? Sometimes we say we're going to do something and then we don't, or we forget, or we say something that we shouldn't have said. And a good friend needs to be able to say to the other, hey, that hurt me. And then a good friend needs to be able to respond, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it like that. I didn't intend to do that. I don't know what I was doing. Can you forgive me? And then a good friend responds, of course. And then maybe your friendship, if it's a small thing, it goes back to where it was. Or if it's a larger thing, perhaps your friendship even deepens because you've now been through this thing together. And going through this thing strengthens your friendship. Friends also enjoy each other. I mean, you think about the friends that you have. There are probably some friends that are hard work. And I'm talking about, like, we have friends that are just, you have to work at that friendship. And then there's other friends that are just, light and easy, and it's no work at all. But even for the friends that are hard, the friends that take effort, there's a reason why you're friends with them, because there is something about them that you enjoy. They bring joy to your life. You enjoy them and they enjoy you. And so when God extends a hand of friendship to us. What God is saying is that God wants us to enjoy him, and that God wants to enjoy life with us too. God, the creator of the universe, enjoys you. Now, when Jesus says this to his disciples, standing in front of him, I have called you friends, he's saying, you all are friends with me. But he also says, I have called you, plural, friends. You are friends with me, but also with each other. Sometimes we have friends that we aren't friends with directly, like we didn't know them prior, but we're friends with them because we have a mutual friend, because we were introduced by another friend. Sometimes it's our spouse, sometimes it's an acquaintance or something like that, but then we become friends through this other person. Those 12 disciples were wildly different from each other. They had erratic personalities. Some of them wanted to dominate each other. Some of them were fishermen. One of them was a tax collector. One of them was a zealot. They were different people. These were not just 12 people that would have just naturally gravitated together and had a barbecue. They came together because each of them were friends with Jesus. And then their friendship grew. This is the other part of why I think this metaphor of our relationship with God as friend is aspirational, because we have the opportunity as fellow disciples of Jesus to be friends with and for each other. There are 2 billion Christians on planet Earth, and 2 billion's a lot. And so some of them are, we would naturally gravitate towards, and we do naturally gravitate towards. We like similar things. We root for the similar teams. We see the world and politics through a similar lens. We dress alike. We eat the same foods. We speak the same language. But 2 billion is also a large number, and so there are going to be some in that 2 billion who are going to be absolutely foreign to us and who we wouldn't normally just gravitate towards. They don't dress like us. They don't eat the same food as us. They don't see the world and politics from the same lens that we do. But Jesus looks at all of us, all 2 billion of us, and says, I have called you friends. And so when we go through life and we meet these other disciples of Jesus, instead of just automatically being like, whoa, they're different, they're weird, they're strange, I don't agree with them, we're from a different place, I'm just going to go the other way, we have an opportunity to say, hey, you're friends with Jesus? I'm friends with Jesus too. We might not have anything else in common, but we have that in common. And isn't what we have in common the most important thing? I began this whole journey on friendship with the words about Abraham and how Abraham was remembered 2,000 years after his life as a friend of God. You can imagine what it would take for people 2,000 and now 4,000 years later to remember someone as a friend of God. What's the one thing we remember about this guy who lived 4,000 years ago? Is that he and God were tight. He and God were friends. What would it take for people to know you in the same way? What would it take for them to know you, not just 2,000 years from now, but today, this week, as, oh, that person, he, she, they're a friend of God? What would you have to do? What priorities would you have to take on? How would you have to speak with God and depend on God and be depended on by God? How would you have to enjoy God and have God enjoy you for you to be seen as God's friend. And whatever is going on in your head right now, whatever thoughts, whatever images, whatever ideas you have, do that. Because Jesus has called you friend.